Have you ever wondered how a nation with almost no flat land and practically zero natural resources becomes a global superpower? Well, that's the incredible story of Japan. You see, it's a country whose entire destiny, from its ancient samurai warriors to its modern tech giants, has been shaped and really dictated by the unchangeable facts of its geography.
Take a look at this number, 73%. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how much of Japan is covered in mountains and forests, basically land you can't live on or farm. This single, stark fact is the key to understanding pretty much everything about Japan's history, its culture, and where it's headed next.
And that, right there, brings us to the foundational challenge that has guided Japan's path for centuries: a desperate, constant scarcity of usable land. It's not just some scenic backdrop for a painting, it's the central problem that Japan has always had to solve.
To really put this into perspective, let's look at a quick comparison. Japan's total land area is roughly the same size as Germany or the state of California. But, and this is the kicker, the difference in usable land is just staggering. While Germany and California are mostly habitable, Japan has only about 27% of its land available to live on, and a tiny 12% for farming. That creates this immense pressure cooker on a very small amount of space.
So where does everybody live? Well, the result of all those mountains is that for centuries, nearly all of Japanese life, we're talking its cities, its farms, its industries, and its seats of power, has been squeezed into just three great plains.
And here they are: the Kanto Plain, where you'll find Tokyo; the Nobi Plain, surrounding Nagoya; and the Yamato Plain, home to the historic cities of Osaka and Kyoto. Now think about this. These three spots make up just 6% of Japan's total territory, yet they're home to an incredible 45% of the entire population. This intense competition for scarce, valuable land has been the fuel for centuries of conflict.
Okay, so if the mountains constrain Japan from the inside, it's the sea that defines it from the outside. You know, for Japan, the ocean has always been two things at once. It's a protective wall, and it's a vital highway.
For most of its history, the sea was this incredible defensive shield. It totally isolated Japan, which allowed it to develop a highly unique, very homogeneous culture, safe from the constant land invasions that defined its neighbors over on the Asian mainland, like China. This feeling of being protected was famously reinforced back in the 13th century. The mighty Mongol Empire, then at the absolute peak of its power, tried to invade Japan not once, but twice. And both times, its massive fleet was utterly destroyed by a powerful typhoon. The Japanese called it kamikaze, or divine wind, and it cemented this powerful idea that their islands were divinely protected.
But here's the flip side of those steep mountains. They create another major problem. They make Japan's rivers really fast and shallow, which makes them completely useless for trade. So unlike Europe with the Rhine or America with the Mississippi, Japan had no great river system to connect its economic hubs.
So what do you do without navigable rivers? Well, Japan adapted brilliantly. It turned its massive coastline into a kind of internal superhighway. Coastal shipping became the nation's lifeblood, and the protected Seto Inland Sea in particular acted like a vast, calm river, connecting all of the country's most important economic zones.
So let's pull all this together. These powerful geographic realities, not enough land and a surrounding sea, forged a set of core survival strategies. These became Japan's 4 geopolitical imperatives. You can think of them as the deep-seated drivers of its actions for centuries. Let's break them down. First, you have to establish centralized control over all the warring clans at home. Second, secure the areas around you to create a buffer zone. Third, go out and acquire the natural resources you desperately lack. And fourth, if you can't take them, achieve commercial expansion to trade for what you need. The first imperative was all about internal survival. That constant, brutal fight over those few fertile plains led to centuries of civil war between powerful clans. Unifying the country was this constant, bloody struggle. It was only really achieved in the 1860s during the Meiji Restoration, when the threat of Western colonialism basically gave the clans a choice: unite or get conquered.
And this created this unique rhythm to Japanese history. The country's always kind of oscillated between long periods of turning inward, focusing on itself in isolation, and then these short, intense bursts of outward expansion, usually triggered by some kind of outside threat or a desperate internal need. The pattern is just remarkably consistent over the centuries.
So once you've got your house in order, what's next? You secure the perimeter. For Japan, this meant dominating nearby territories, especially the Korean peninsula. The fear was that a rival power, like China or Russia, could use it as a staging ground for an invasion. And it was this defensive impulse that drove Japan into its first modern wars.
All right, so Japan is unified and it's got a buffer zone. But to become a modern industrial power, you need stuff. You need fuel, oil, iron ore, coal. And Japan had basically none of it. To build a modern economy and a powerful military, it really felt it had no choice but to expand and secure these resources abroad. And as we know, this relentless drive is what ultimately led to its faithful collision with the United States in World War II.
After 1945, military expansion was completely off the table, but the geographic constraints, they didn't just disappear. Japan still needed resources, so it brilliantly channeled all of its national energy and discipline into a new kind of expansion: commercial. It became an absolute economic powerhouse, using global trade to get the security it once sought through conquest.
And that brings us to today. Japan has masterfully adapted to its old challenges, but now it faces a whole new set of constraints, and they're playing out in an increasingly uncertain and dangerous future.
You know, the Japanese sometimes refer to their nation as an earthquake society. And they don't just mean geologically. They mean that their history is marked by these sudden, violent shocks that force radical, top-to-bottom transformation. And right now, many believe they are in the middle of another one of those major tremors.
At the heart of it all is this central dilemma, a clash of two worlds. On one side, you have its post-war pacifist constitution, which forbids a standing army. But on the other, you have an increasingly dangerous neighborhood, with an assertive China and a nuclear-armed North Korea right on its doorstep. How can it possibly reconcile its identity with this new reality?
At the exact same time, Japan is facing a profound crisis from within. Its population isn't just aging, it's shrinking at an absolutely alarming rate. This demographic time bomb is a threat to its economy, its social fabric, and its very ability to maintain its standing in the world.
At the end of the day, Japan's geography has always forced it to do one thing: adapt or perish. It's weathered Mongol invasions, total resource scarcity, and a devastating defeat in war. But the threats it faces now, both from the outside and from within, are entirely new. Which leaves us with one final, big question. For a nation shaped by tremors, what will the next big shakeup be?